Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who, when he's playing Star Wars tabletop RPGs, always plays a scoundrel.
Tim Longo.
That's your class.
No. You are
to the Ranger.
Yeah, maybe scoundrel. Let's see. What did I? Yeah, I guess maybe I would play scoundrel. The last time
I always play as a member of a band.
Is this a bard reference? Yeah, nice.
It is.
The last character I played in a Star Wars RPG, which wasn't actually that long ago. I think we've talked about this before, maybe, or I've told you. It was a Bothan. Yeah, it might have been a scoundrel, actually. Yeah, it was a Bothan.
All Bothans are spies.
Yeah, Bothan.
That's
Bothan spies.
That's how George rolls. Anyway, why are we talking about Star Wars? Well, of course, because we are turning this week with a new Star Wars movie on the imminent horizon. This coming weekend,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah, 25th.
We are turning to a Star Wars game in Dark Forces, which features kind of a scoundrel character. And we'll get to that in a little while. Many scoundrel characters, really, but the main character is a scoundrel, is what I meant. But first, we should sort of set this thing in its context, and of course, maybe, I don't know, should you recuse yourself? Let's talk. Let's at least touch on the fact that you had a little something to do with this game.
Oh yeah. I mean, I had. I was telling Brett in pre-show. As I started the game off, kind of a lot of memories came rushing back to me, as it often does when we're playing these games for the podcast. However, in this case, though I didn't work on this particular version we're playing, I had worked on the port for the PlayStation 1 as a tester. It was primarily I was on X-Men versus TIE Fighter and some other stuff, but this one I kind of hinted on and played and got assigned a few levels. One of the levels being the sewer level. And so then when I started that level up, I was like, oh man, a little nausea.
I want to hope that you found all the secrets.
Well, I sped through, and I don't remember it that well. But I did remember how to kind of get through the switch system. But yeah, so I did technically work on one of the ports for this PlayStation, which I'm looking at the site here was the next year that it came out, and I started in '96, so that was the year it would have been shipping.
There you go.
Yeah, so I started in April and it shipped in November. So yeah, so I wasn't at one of the core ones, but I did, work on the PlayStation version of this game as a tester occasionally. So not a big deal, but this is the first game that we've played that either of us have touched in a development way of some kind, I believe, right? That's true.
Yeah, no, definitely true.
Yeah. And then we're kind of looking at the credits list, and it's just kind of another fun trip down memory lane because you see, at least when I was looking at the credits up top, which they oddly have at the beginning, kind of movie style, which we should ask Daron about, because it's ironic because George made such a big deal about not having credits in the beginning of the film, so it's sort of opposite. But anyway, yeah. So it was interesting to see a list of names go by that I knew almost every single one of them.
Right. Well, it wasn't uncommon for the video games, though. I mean, Day of the Tentacle had it as well. So,
yeah, I don't remember that. Yeah, I mean, it's common for films. It's just funny because that was a big deal, right? George's
right.
One of his big film, impacts, I would say, is that weird thing that he did with the credits. So. Anyway.
That's because he doesn't like actors. But we don't need to talk about George. Let's talk about 1995.
Yeah, 1995. The year it came out.
Pretty big year for. I mean, I was looking, and the thing that stood out to me is that there are a lot of. This is really kind of an adventure game heyday in a way, just because there's so many of them. With 2 from LucasArts, Full Throttle and The Dig. 2, I believe, from Sierra in Phantasmagoria and Gabriel Knight, The Beast Within. And then the 11th Hour, which was I don't remember who made that. I'd have to click through here, but was sort of the successor to the Seventh Guest, which had been a big success. I don't think the 11th Hour is quite so much. And then another one that came up was I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. So a lot of adventure games this year, and a lot of games generally. As you were pointing out, boy, a lot of games used to come out, and that is definitely true. You want to throw in some other interesting titles from that year?
Well, the follow-up, Warcraft 2 was that year, which was the follow-up to the game we've played, Warcraft 1. And Warcraft 2 was a huge, huge game for Blizzard, maybe one of the most critical ones for their sort of sustained success after that, I'd say, because it did so well. The CD-ROM version of TIE Fighter came out, so that's also indirectly, kind of related. Command and Conquer came out, the first one.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of, so yeah, it's interesting. And then I just noticed as I was skimming the list again, Flight Unlimited by Looking Glass Studios, which was proof that they did some other things before they found their stride and kind of theme for their games. And then Chrono Trigger was the last one I think we needed to mention, which we haven't played for the podcast yet, but is
one of these days.
Yeah, very, very beloved game. And then I kind of was noticing some of the companies too, and it's funny to see Chrono Trigger, which is listed as Square, and then you have Enix on here for this game I don't recognize, King Arthur and the Knights of Justice. But then of course they merge later and become Square Enix. So yeah, interesting year. And as far as shooters go, Descent was the other one I wanted to mention too, which is sort of in the kind of, a sibling to shooters, but not strictly the same kind of thing. But as far as shooters go, there wasn't a lot of competition for Dark Forces in this year. Marathon 2 was on this year as well. But they were... And
Hexen, I see.
Oh, okay. Hexen's not on my list, I don't think. So there's only a few players in that game, though, at this point, right? And obviously Doom before this, and it's kind of a big influence for everybody. But of course, I remember playing shareware version of Doom at a friend's house in college, and thinking to myself, because I think I've said on the podcast before, it's just the Doom aesthetic and the kind of the theme of it has just never really stuck with me. It's just not my thing. But obviously, being a huge Star Wars fan, I thought to myself, man, wouldn't this Doom game be cool if it were a Star Wars game? And then Dark Forces is the answer to that. And I would very easily say that other than the Sierra games, which we've talked about, and some of the other LucasArts adventure games and stuff, Dark Forces specifically was probably the main game that made me want to be, a game developer. Definitely fond memories. In fact, I might have told the story before, but a friend and I, when we were in college, would start a level of this game at the same time, but talking on the phone. And so we sort of faked co-op through the game and kind of would narrate what we're doing to each other over the phone as we were playing the same level to see how we were doing. Because we both were big Star Wars fans and such. And so, yeah, this was it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is something that I would want to get into, and not, the next year I would interview, or I would interview at LucasArts for a test job.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing. I actually didn't play it, I don't think until 1997. Not long before my interview with LucasArts, actually with Daron Stinnett, ultimately, who was the project lead for this game, and our first boss on the Starfighter games, my first boss at LucasArts, and not your first boss, but your first when we were working together. Mm-hmm. So, and then he would go on to be executive producer for Republic Commando as well. So. Yeah, well, a lot of history here, and of course the engine here would go on to get used again in Outlaws, and something else, I think. Maybe not. Maybe just those two, and then the Dark Forces name would continue in Jedi Knight. and Kyle would go a different direction. But we'll probably talk about that towards the end of our short series here. I think we're going to try to do this in three episodes as well. So yeah, let's dive in. I think that kind of puts it in place. I did see there were even more adventure games this year. Bioforge and D were another couple ones that stood out. This is really the height, of those sorts of things. Adventure games are really still crushing it in the market. And interesting. This is, was there another like non-flight action Star Wars game before this?
Well, I don't mean the arcade games. Other than the NES had Super Star Wars. I don't remember what year that was, but not 3D. I don't think. We'll probably get some sort of email about this that we're messing it up.
Yeah, I know. There's definitely Rebel Assault.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but still, kind of weird hybrid kind of game. The first Rebel Assault, did it have any running around? Wasn't it all flight? Maybe it didn't. I feel like the second was when they introduced running around.
Rebel Assault 2 also came out in this year, so.
Oh, okay.
I'd have to look and see, but it's really a rail shooter. And one of them definitely had sections where you sort of controlled a character, and it was filmed, and you popped out and stuff like that. Funny
FMV. That was that was the CD-ROM era.
Right.
They were figuring, missed.
What do we put on the?
Yeah, Rebel Assault sold really well, though, as I recall. That was a biggie for them.
Big hit. Yep. Okay, well let's dive in. You jumped right in. And I knew it was going to be one of your topics because it was certainly a thing. I streamed this earlier today, and the level design is a thing that comes up again and again. A lot for me, looking at it and then pulling out to the map. It's pretty complicated. Yeah. Way more than Doom levels seem to be. Certainly Doom 2, the levels get a little bit more complicated. But you're a level designer, so I should probably, or originally were a level designer. Jump in. Tell me about this.
Well, I wasn't sure what topics would emerge as we started playing this, but the one that really hit me right off the bat is level design and complexity of level design and sense of place. And some of it, I guess, is a little inside baseball for me, having worked with people that worked on this game and talking to people about it, and some of it about the development process. And I may have told this story before, maybe Reed or Darren did when we had them on, Reed Knight and Darren Johnson, who were testers at the same time that I was, and then went on to be designers as well. But, one of the interesting things that Darren talked about back in those days when I moved into level design and others, Kevin Schmidt, who was my level design lead my first level design lead, they didn't, level design wasn't a discipline at the time. Doom, as we know, with Romero and American McGee and all those folks, they were kind of making it up as they go. And I don't remember exactly how each of them got into the business, but LucasArts was sort of in this, they knew they wanted to do this game, Dark Forces, and they knew they wanted to, kind of be something to innovate beyond what Doom was doing and tell a story and kind of really, fulfill that Star Wars fantasy. So they wanted to have the locations pretty fleshed out and interesting and intricate, and kind of really feel like you're in the Star Wars world and in different cool Star Wars-y locations. But they didn't really know who was going to build those locations, and because the concept of a level designer wasn't really a thing yet, not like we know it today. And so what they ended up doing was they went to UC Berkeley nearby and basically sourced the architecture department. And some of the best level designers that I've ever worked with are on this game. Inger Shu and Matt Tadaishi are two that come to my mind. And they worked on Jedi Knight as well, or Dark Forces 2. And they were architecture students, right? They were using AutoCAD in school, and there was AutoCAD-like tools basically that were used to make these games, and so they kind of it naturally made sense. And Kevin Schmidt, actually, whom I've already mentioned, was also coming from architecture school, and so it kind of made sense. And I bring that up because, to me, I think that's one of the reasons why this game stands out from a sense of place perspective, because there's not always completely logical flow or composition or architectural identity or what have you, but they do have much more logic put into how things work when you're running around the space. Now, you can definitely get lost and it's not always clear, but there was at least an attempt to do that. And thus also, I think what got away from them, and we actually had someone over Twitter mention this, I forget who it was, one of the listeners who had kind of gone back to replay this game too and said that he got lost a lot. And I think the interesting thing, and I'd forgotten about how elaborate the map was, is with that sort of architectural goal that these architecture students were bringing to it, added in the complexity as well. And so that weird combination of game design and actual architecture, kind of merged in a weird way. And I think it caused some of the confusion for people when it comes to getting lost. But anyway, sense of place, I think verticality in the levels was something that I would say, innovated in as well, and having this.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, it's a technical innovation as well. To be able to tilt up and down like that. It has sort of there's sort of a fakey parallax going on. Like you can't tilt too far doing this because it ends up looking really wrong. Sort of like we played something else.
Underworld.
Maybe it was it was Underworld. Yep, exactly right. Which had a really weird. Yeah. You tilt down and everything kind of gets swimmy and strange. But being able to shoot multiple levels and putting in an auto aim or aim assist or something like that in order to make that work for players. I mean, it's a godsend playing it now to have that help. So that was really interesting to me as well.
And looking up and down, ducking and jumping, I think was also something that they added in. We'll probably get into it later, but the gadgetry too. I wanted to ask you about the rendering side when it comes to the lighting and some of the atmospherics that they did, and just like the integration of the level design with even simple concepts of, I will say, light puzzles, that we saw in the second and third levels this time, like with the big water turbines and kind of running across those things. And just, I don't know, just like I remember playing this and feeling like I was in Star Wars because there was a lot of attention and care given to the construction of the spaces, and I don't know, that definitely was a macro theme that I'm sure we'll talk about a lot. And there's some even better levels coming up. Really memorable levels coming up. Yeah.
And in terms of that sense of place, I mean, you mentioned things like that. I mean, you're definitely drawing on the sense of sort of immense scale of the films, but also the immense scale of basically things like, well, and this is a factory or a sewer room or whatever, and not something super abstract or anything like that. So, I mean, one of the things that really sets us apart, as you point out, is the grounding in real architecture, whereas Doom is much more abstract, and deliberately so, right? It's supposed to be you're slowly descending into hell, more or less, and you're out on military bases on other planets or what have you. So, it makes sense that should be more abstract and more strange and all of that stuff. Here, there is a slight alienness, but that's fine because it is Star Wars. But also, you have those elements, those moving elements, such as the turbine. There was another one. Well, and then the sort of the sewers kind of ties multiple things together. Of course, you're definitely pulling in a original Star Wars movie sort of location. It's industrial space. I mean, there's always kind of concerns with like I don't know, to a certain degree, the economics of the worlds in Star Wars. I mean, there's so much in the lore about who made what and like, how all these things are constructed, the TIE fighters and, CNR systems and all that stuff that I, don't really care about. But but that kind of comes in, and then you also have all that verticality because in the sewer levels, you're literally going down with the sewage and finding elevators to bring you back up, and you're sort of making these circuits back through these spaces to get kind of more out of them. There's kind of a big room that's in a way got a lot of detail in it, and so it's interesting that they keep funneling you back to it because it makes a lot of sense that they would want to. So there's some interesting things going on there. It's like somebody thought about it and said, well, how would you, where's all the sewage going to go? Well, it's got to go downhill, right? And sort of really thinking about that stuff. And making it all make sense. So it is really interesting from that standpoint. I had forgotten the turbines and the rotating bridges and things like that. That was a total surprise. Oh yeah, that's right. This had that sort of thing. So
yeah, and that was something that, and again, a little bit kind of inside baseball on this stuff, but that was a level design department kind of legacy that had been, passed on from game to game, and Jedi Knight, the sequel, went even farther with this. And I remember having long conversations with Reed, who went from QA to level designer on that game. And, they were, when you're going to Nar Shaddaa or something like that, which I believe we will go to in this game, or maybe that's the second one only. But, there's just, you really are in this Star Wars city. They just do a great job at making it feel that way. And like you said, having some pseudo logic to how things work, even though there's definitely level design, gaminess and flow to it. Part of the reason people are going to play this game is they want to live in Star Wars, and each of the levels kind of will have a theme, as we'll see, that feels like you're either in a scene from the movies or a place where you didn't know you wanted to go in the movies, but it feels very much like it's supposed to be there. And then I kind of similar to some of the stuff I believe we talked about with TIE Fighter, the thing that I always loved about, the TIE Fighter, X-Wing, this game in particular, as a fan back then, is that they generally did a great job at adding to Star Wars in a sort of safe and like Star Warsy way. Brett brought this up in some specific designs, but I'm even talking fictionally, where there aren't characters and storylines that feel out of place that they couldn't work in Star Wars. So I really feel like it was extending, because don't forget, around this era there were no new films yet, right? This was the quiet era between
right. All we had was the Thrawn trilogy, I believe. At this point,
was a big watermark. Yeah, that was a big spike of interest. Some toys were still coming out here and there, but like we only had the original trilogy, and so anything that we could get our hands on, comics were here. some novels, but even that was minimal at the time, until the Thrawn stuff came out. But all we really had were these games, for me at least, and they were adding, to it. And then an example of that in the first level is you go, which is ironic because of the new film Rogue One. You go after the Death Star plans, and it's sort of like,
yeah.
And it was just cool, and it was fun to be on the other side of that, where we would have, because I worked at, my first job was level designer on the expansion pack to Jedi Knight. And so it was just fun to have conversations about, okay, how are we going to add to the canon in our own way? And of course, none of this stuff ended up becoming canon, but it was to us. And so we wanted everyone who worked on these games loved Star Wars and wanted to respect Star Wars, and add to it. And so that was cool. And this game, I think, is just one of the ultimate examples of that. TIE Fighter as well, but this one, even just the Dark Troopers alone are something that, that are, memorable for people, and they fit, So.
Yeah. And I mean, it's trying to create characters that are very much in the Star Wars mold.
Yeah.
And also using some peripheral characters, right? So, I mean, Kyle Katarn is, the reason why I use that term at the top is he's a total scoundrel character in this game, and he's kind of in touch. He's basically doing missions that take him into the underworld of Star Wars, which is kind of interesting in and of itself, because that is another thread that's kind of in the movies with Jabba the Hutt and all of that sort of thing, as well as the hive of scum and villainy. But so you have that going on. You bring in side characters like Mon Mothma. You're bringing in a good pilot,
Jan Ors.
Jan Ors, who's bringing you everywhere.
A rebel, essentially. Yeah, working.
But a good pilot and everything. Mm-hmm. So you've got that going on. You've got the tie with the Death Star, and then very specific elements that I was thinking about as I played it is that they brought in specific visual and mechanical things to use, like the search droids. I forget what those things are called, but that floating droid that gets the probe droid, right? That gets shot at the beginning of Empire by Chewie, or the thermal detonators, which in the film you get the sense that is a much more powerful object than sort of as a small grenade that we tended to use it for in games. I think it's interesting the way you try to shoehorn those things in, because you don't want to invent some other thing if you have a existing Star Wars thing that will work if you just kind of squint at it, right? So it's just interesting to see all this stuff again. I mean, I haven't thought about a Star Wars game from that standpoint in quite a while. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and then I mean, even for the Star Wars nerds out there like me, and there were a couple of these little cameos in TIE Fighter as well. So it was kind of a legacy that everyone kept, like that was a theme. Crix Madine is mentioned early on, and that's actually a character you see, I believe, in the first film very quickly, who's unnamed, named later. And so you see an image, and there's a little bit of that going on in the TIE Fighter. I had forgotten about this, and this is public knowledge, but originally I think the goal was that the main character was going to be Luke. And do you remember that? And they decided not to. Supposedly the story goes, they decided not to because they knew that would constrain what they could do with the character and with the story. So they created their own character, and, essentially a Han type character who, was a mercenary, and they gave him a lot more flexibility, of course, and added a new character into the universe. So Crix Madine, and then some of the locations we go to, I don't know. Jan, I think is made up for this too.
I'm pretty sure, yes.
But yeah, Rebel Alliance, and then Kyle, I think worked for the Empire at some point. They mentioned that, right? And then
I believe so. Yeah, and
then sort of like went Merc. Which I think maybe Han has a history with the Empire too. So yeah, definitely. Then he has his own ship, the Moldy Crow, and so you really there's a lot of parallels there that hits all the.
Yeah, well, it's not a Falcon, it's a crow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a cool design.
I mean, they're definitely. Yeah, they're just. I mean, they're really leaning on that aspect of the fantasy, and yeah, I mean, it's absolutely the case that you want to avoid. Having to deal with what's already been written about Han, what are we allowed to do, or Luke for that matter. Either way, those characters you have to be extremely careful with, especially back then. It was a time where that really hadn't loosened up yet, in terms of what they would allow you to do.
No, and
there was no Battlefront or whatever, where you're like, well, okay, you can have, you can put whatever in this.
Yeah.
So it's sort of interesting.
Well, and then the other category that kind of goes with your point about like, how do you shoehorn and, kind of elaborate on Star Wars mechanics and tropes in a game atmosphere. I had forgotten about how many sort of sub mechanics there really were in this game when it comes to, Doom had armor, right? Was armor the secondary health?
Yeah.
So, they substitute that for shields in this. And then you also have your all your gadgets that you use, which has a Star Wars feel to it. But it takes battery power. And so we'll use those more and more. You get your infrared or your night vision sort of thing.
Yeah, infrared. Yeah, they call it infrared.
Yeah, which is, I don't think, completely accurate, but and then your headlamp, which that's what I was going to ask you, that jogged my memory. Was the headlamp and the lighting, because when you fire your weapon, there's a burst of light in the darkness, right, that lights up the world around. Like, was that innovative at the time, or was that already kind of overdone with Doom and things?
I mean, certainly Doom had plenty of sort of lights that would flicker and things like that. It's all vertex-based lighting. I don't know how they specifically did the lighting here. I have to imagine they just went out to a certain distance, and when you fire the weapon, probably they found the nearest vertices, and if they were close enough, they lit them as well.
Yeah.
And then with the light, I'm sure it was more like a view frustum type thing. You have to be really careful with that for performance.
Yeah, so, the headlamp doesn't go very far ahead of you if you're in the dark, but it's just enough to, I mean, even just the concept of having, pitch black rooms, that enemies are running around in. Oh, and the other little tidbit I wanted to mention from an AI perspective, which I hope we get to ask somebody about in this one. I'm trying to think if Doom had this at all. I don't think Wolfenstein had it, or what the sort of level of technology was at the time. But you'll come upon enemies that have their backs to you and are in a non-alert stage. So it's not like every time you come into a room, everyone's just going to come attack you. It's not that you can sneak around per se, but you just, that again, it's a small touch, but it adds to the sense of sort of pseudo-realism, because
you can get the drop on somebody. There's not really a stealth mechanic, but it just works out that, I mean, as soon as you shoot, everybody knows you're there.
Yeah, but it just feels it's more good. Real, because like, oh, well, that stormtrooper is just on patrol and moving back and forth, and their back is to me, and that makes a lot of sense. Versus, and then the VO that they play is just classic and great. And the music too, which was also Clint, I believe. Reimagining some of John Williams, obviously John Williams
doing it with the MIDI and as well, because
and the funny thing that Reed and I would always talk about with this soundtrack specifically, because we played it so much for work and stuff, is in my head some of these tracks are they feel so John Williams like. But in my head, sometimes I will hear a track from Dark Forces and think that it's from the films, because it's like in my memory someplace, because Clint Bajakian did such a great job reimagining the Williams aesthetic, and of course I've played Dark Forces way more than I've watched the movies from an hour per hour perspective, and so those songs play over and over and over again. It's like the Mario theme or something, but for me it's like the themes from this, where I was convinced for many years that they just took these songs from the films, and then once I got to LucasArts, I realized no, these are essentially original, but in the theme of Star Wars. So the music's great and gets even better.
No, I look forward to hearing more of it. I would not say I played, even from an hour standpoint, played more of this than I've seen the original films. So, or even just the original, the Star Wars, because I saw that so many times when I was a kid. They showed it at my school frequently. So it was like, I saw it. I think I saw it 4 times before I was out of middle school on a screen. It's more. It's just I saw it a lot.
No, and I did too. But for me, what put it over the edge is just testing.
Right. So of course. Yeah.
That's why the hour count went up. I don't think if I hadn't done that, but although I did play the game multiple times before I started. But it's just like this. We'll talk about this more as we go. But the numbers and cool places that you get to go in this game, that just really nail it on the places that players and fans really would want to go to. And I won't spoil things for anyone who's playing along, but there's just some fun surprises. And so it's just the sense of place for each of the locations is just really pretty well fully realized. I had forgotten, I'm looking through my notes, I had also forgotten about some of we talked about this with Half-Life some and kind of shooters of the era, but some of the physics aspects of the movement and how finicky that is, and we had some jumping puzzles in this section that
I wonder if we could even talk about the controls a little bit, because they're experimenting a little bit, I want to say.
You can use a joystick.
Right. Well, you can actually use the mouse.
No, I'm using the mouse, but in the manual, that kind of
But you can use the mouse to move forward and back.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So just
and in fact, if you hold the right mouse button down, you run, or you move forward. So that's what I'm doing, because I can't slide back and forth all the time and drive myself mad. And I have that special keyboard for my RSI, and
so
I don't. My arrows. No, well, I'd have to go into the configuration file.
Mine just worked.
Yours just was WASD?
It was set up. I was surprised, actually, that it was already.
Oh, did you get it off of Steam?
Yeah.
Oh, I got it off of GOG.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, what a weird difference.
I already had it. I already bought it, so I didn't. Yeah. That's what Huh, how funny.
What I should probably do is look at my Steam library, because I probably also already bought it at some point. I didn't even know. But because that's the kind of person I am. I have things in multiple libraries, apparently. It was really funny. I went to use WASD and it didn't work. I'm like, oh my God, I can't play this whole game with just a mouse.
Yeah.
And then my arrow keys aren't together. So I was like, oh my God, what am I even going to do? I'll have to, and I've just figured next time I'll go and figure out. I'm sure there's a configuration file, obviously. Because you're using it that way. But I was a little worried.
Yeah, that's going to be rough, I think, on you later if you don't fix that.
I'll fix it.
Well, ultimately it was definitely tuned primarily for keyboard use, because it was still transitioning from mouse, right, as we've talked about before. And I'm definitely not using the look up and look down very much, because it's just while playing with. I guess I could maybe remap that over near WASD or something, but I don't know if I can remap it actually.
Well, you must be able to
in a third party thing or something, or.
No, just I'm sure there's a configuration text file or something like that.
Oh, maybe a text file. Yeah, the interface doesn't have it, but anyway.
Yeah, there's nothing in the interface, but in a text file.
Yeah.
It was config files back then. It was not. You would not be able to get.
Not super fancy.
No, definitely not super fancy.
But I just haven't. There's pretty cumbersome to try to use the look up and down for any good reason in the middle of action. So I'm just relying on the auto aim, which is another funny thing, to mention there. I forgot how much that really impacts your moment to moment. But you just slide around a lot. With the movement, and it's very physicsy. And I just had forgotten about how swimmy it was, and it really adds to the feel of it. But that was kind of part of the thing of that era, I guess, is really what it is. Because Half-Life had some of that too, and we're still refining that. It's just funny.
It's also, it's a much faster first-person shooter than things tend to be now. Ever since the advent of cover shooters, it's been all about move and stop, and not super fast-paced.
Mm-hmm.
Often a lot of sort of crouching and moving and trying to get an angle on something. And here it's very much like I was blazing through these levels like, oh man, I remember when you could do this. You could just, the physics didn't make any sense physically, but who cared? It was fun. It was it's a lot closer to an arcade game from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, I missed that to some degree, because that has definitely been a big change in shooters, is that they're not nearly as fast paced as they were. I'm not sure I could do that all the time, just because, I've gotten older, and it's not as easy to do that. But I really, going back to a game like this, it's really fun to just go.
Yeah. Barnstorm.
Yeah.
Another topic that I wrote down was really just, and this is compared to, say, the Dooms of the time, and we talked about some with TIE Fighter because it's a similar structure, but the sort of like, cinematic storytelling intermixed with levels, having cinematics at all, seeing Darth Vader pop up, in an early one, seeing seeing the main characters in 2D, cinematics, and then also with mission briefings, which sort of giving you that backstory and that kind of setup, which is cool and very, it's the, like you said, the hive of scum and villainy version of a military mission, in a way, which is a fantasy that really the films never really elaborated on. You kind of always wanted, and not many games too. Like the apparent, supposedly the Amy Hennig project was kind of going in this direction, and we finally were going to have a game where we could play as that sort of, the scoundrel, posse. So unfortunately, yeah, that's too bad that we won't see that. But it is a fantasy people want, and this was one of the games that I remember being the first ones to really like, oh yeah, it is fun to be a rogue. Not everyone has to be a freaking Jedi. There's a whole side of Star Wars that is all about these sorts of missions and this kind of rebel, counter espionage kind of stuff, which was really neat. So I like the structure of the game basically, and then telling a story through a shooter, which other than the Half-Lives of the world and stuff, there wasn't a lot of that going on in an elaborate way. The id stuff tended to not get very deep into that stuff. Right. It was more of just kind of a setting and a tone than it was an actual story, until much later, Doom 3 maybe. So yeah,
that definitely got. I mean, even then, there's still a lot of tone, but yeah, this is definitely an early shooter with an attempt at a narrative in it, and characters that have names. For example, I mean, in Doom, it's just Doom guy, right? There is you do have BJ Blazkowicz in Wolfenstein, so it's not like there aren't characters, but there is no story to BJ Blazkowicz. His story is that he kills Nazis, right? So there's really not a lot there, and this one definitely. There's multiple characters, and you have one of them's giving you your mission briefing, and Mon Mothma's there, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you're bringing in all this Star Wars stuff, which does a fair amount of the heavy lifting for you, right? I mean, you don't have to do any world building around any of this because that's already been done. That's been established.
Good point, yeah.
But you can lean right into it. Yeah, I mean, the other ones, I think, those other games of the time have to do more world building, and maybe they don't have the time to do any character building as a result. So you set up this story that is, hell is advancing because we've opened some portal on Mars or something. That's already a lot to wrap your head around, and the story is basically what new enemies am I going to see and when. So you don't kind of do much with the character, because it's also meant to be kind of isolating and one hero. Which is not really Star Wars thing. Star Wars is the ragtag band, right? So you got that too.
I know I wanted to ask you too if you had any insight. I was surprised all over again in the level when the Moldy Crow flies into the landing pad to pick you up and is kind of hovering above you. Being a fully 3-dimensional object that was kind of flying around and animated, how much of that was going on? Because the big innovation for Jedi Knight being the sequel is that all the enemies and all the characters ended up being polygonal, right? Which was kind of where Quake went. Right. Quake was trailblazing that with id, and then Unreal as well. But it was just cool to see the Moldy Crow in 3D kind of flying in.
Right.
When everything else is, all the other animated objects are sprites.
Yeah, it's starting at this time, right? Because of course you mentioned, I don't know if we mentioned it on air, but Descent. Was of course that's 3D ships as well, and 3D geometry had to be, right, because it was the 6 degrees of freedom.
That game's crazy.
That's a tough game to wrap your head around at that time. Maybe people would find it easier today, but so it was certainly starting, but everything was all still software rendered. So there just wasn't a lot of extra oomph for doing it. You wouldn't necessarily have a floating point coprocessor on every machine, right? So you wouldn't even be able to do floating point math. You'd have to do fixed point math, which means everything is integers. Which can be tricky. You get the most performance out of that, especially at the time. But 3D math is really tricky in that. just because you get a lot of error. So things end up kind of jiggling and stuff. You see that on the PlayStation, for example. So because everything there is fixed point. So yeah, it's a super interesting time for 3D, and having a single model is probably about what they could do.
Yeah,
to be honest,
I didn't try shooting it, which I will try next time. But I'm assuming it because it's above you, you can't get to it. So I assume it has no collision or anything.
I wouldn't think so, and I'm sure that's why they put it there.
Yeah. But the effect is just, I remember at the time kind of just being blown away. It's kind of a small touch, but very, because you see the Moldy Crow in the animated cutscenes, right? And some of them are CG rendered. So you see, the ships and stuff are in 3D. All the people seem to be, obviously in 2D, but to see the ship in the cutscene and then see it flying in to the actual space was kind of a nice connection point.
Right. And it makes the thing seem like it's better rendered than it is when it's actually in the game, because you've now just seen it better rendered, which is another common trick.
Right.
In game development is show something high res and then your mind will sort of think of it as being that resolution always. You sort of have your strongest association with however you first see it. So anyway.
Yeah. Very interesting. It's super fun to jump back in, and it's a good suggestion to play it. I'm some of the levels coming up. I'm excited and terrified by, and I hope people are playing. People who haven't played it before are willing to, play it with us or play it at some point, because I think it's a real gem.
Yeah, I mean, one final note about the levels is that the first three are kind of nice in that they ramp up in scale, which was something that Brian Taylor, who has been pushing for us to play this game for a long time, but it's something he pointed out is that the first one's really quite small and the second one's not. I mean, it's much bigger, but it's not dramatically like you can get your mind around it. And then the third one is kind of feels enormous already. And there's more of that coming. So I don't think we're done. We haven't seen the end of the scaling of the level size. So that will be an interesting challenge. You can really lean on the map, thankfully. When there's a great map interface to go.
I did have to use it to refresh my memory on the sewers. It's like which door did what. And then there's just like there's some funny little idiosyncrasies with the game too, because they still have some gamey power ups like extra lives and stuff. Oh, and we didn't even talk about save system. Like there isn't. You got to start over.
You have there's checkpoints and lives. Yeah. You have 3 lives per level or something like that, and die too many times, start over.
Yeah, and I think it's persistent, right? Like all of your resources are persistent from level to level. So, yeah, I think
I'll be starting this one over.
Yeah, I think so. I think your ammo and your energy. I think I have that right.
Oh, I thought you meant lives.
I think your lives too. Yeah, I think.
I think you get 3 per level.
Oh, well,
I should probably check that.
I've found 2 extra lives, so I have 5 total right now, and they keep coming with me. So maybe, maybe.
I may have a lot to worry about here, because I didn't really think about it, and I died a couple times.
Yeah,
I might be on my last life already, for all I know.
It's like those darn trash compactor monsters. What are they called again? You named them. Dianogas, right? Yeah, they bypass your shields so they can sneak up on you, and take you down fast.
That's why.
They ignore your shields
because they get right in next to you. Right?
They think they do maybe 20 health of hit, so they'll take you down fast if you're not paying attention.
They sure will. Well, I'm going to take us down fast, take a quick break, and we'll come back and hit our email, and we have another singing review.
Oh, no.
welcome back from the break. We have a review and an email this time. Apple Podcast reviews are a great way for us to reach out to new listeners. It's the sort of thing that bumps you up in ratings and rankings and all that sort of thing. And also, apparently, people have decided they want to send in songs for me to try to sing, and I have to try to recognize them and figure out how to make a melody out of the words they've got. So that's a thing. That's a whole new thing.
You need to request from now on that people are specific about the song.
Yeah, they might have to. Maybe. They might have to put apologies at the end, like apologies to. In this case, I think it might be the Ramones. Certainly, some kind of punk thing. There was a brand of punk called Oi Punk in the 80s. I had to look this up. This one I did not know off the top of my head.
This is going to get away from you. This I predict.
It already has.
Yeah.
Second one is already. Anyway. And yes, and emails as well. I guess I'll give you the email data in a moment, but I will try to do this. This is from Buttercup Scratch and Sniff, if that is your real name.
Oh boy.
Totally reasonable name. The title is We're DGC. So it goes, oi, 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 come on in and have a listen on your podcast device. We are out on a mission. No other show will suffice. We talk about some good old games and their impact today. If you've got the time, we've got the cast every week on Wednesday. Because we're DGC with Tim Longo. DGC with Brett Duville. DGC, we're video game devs. DGC, come check out our show. That's it.
Yeah. Oh my
wow.
God! You nailed it. That was
my throat is dying now.
You went for it. Good. That wore you out. You're gonna sleep really really well.
I'm gonna sleep all day tomorrow, except I have to get up at 5:30.
Oh no.
Yep.
Thank you, Buttercup. I applaud that was really good. Keep them coming, everybody.
Yeah, great. But yes, please, in case I don't recognize it, either shoot me an email or put it right there at the bottom of the review. This is meant to be like whatever from the summer.
I don't know if in my life I would have ever thought I would hear you sing a punk something. That was
You've had it now.
Yeah. I scratch that one off the list. I can move on with my life.
Keep in mind there are serious limits to my voice, so no K-pop, can't do it.
Maybe some the Platters or some high.
I could, I'd probably be pretty good at something croony, like a Bing Crosby or something like that.
Okay, you're giving suggestions now. I see. Can't wait for Christmas time. We're gonna get some carols out there.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, I sent an email over to you. Yeah. This email was sent into devgameclub@gmail.com. And we'd love to have your questions and thoughts there. We don't read everything that we get, and we also take suggestions for games there, but I do try to reply to every email we receive. So, but we do like to read them on air when there's questions and things like that. So go.
The subject is bonus content in God of War from Daniel C. Hi, Brett and Tim. I really enjoyed your discussion on God of War as someone finally playing it for the first time after sitting on it for so long. It was cathartic to hear others struggle with those balancing scenarios. One thing I don't recall coming up in the discussion in the post-game is the post-game unlockable, specifically the unused character model room. It was great to see those unused assets and the design technical reason why they were excluded from the final product. Any thoughts on ways or discussions you have had to surface unused content like that before? Thankfully, the proliferation of game art books in recent years seems to have made sharing those concepts with consumers feasible for developers, but it's still very rare to see that stuff directly in-game. P.S. I just replayed Republic Commando on the Xbox One X last month and would love to get a look at some of those notes you talked about in the last episode. Thanks.
I'll take that last bit first. I found my Republic Commando notebook. I used to use these lab notebooks. They're like they were spiral bound, I guess, wire bound, I guess they're technically called, and they're grid paper and they're huge. They're like scientific notebooks. Like if you do,
I remember those.
Yeah, I had them, and so did Andrew Kermsey. That's where I got them from. So I had one for Jedi Starfighter and for Republic Commando, and I have both of those as well as other ones from my career. But there's a real mix of stuff in there, so I'd have to really think about how to extract that out. I mean, technically, I'm probably not even supposed to have that, but nobody from LucasArts is probably going to come after me at this point. But yeah, I mean, that's all, I guess, technically IP owned by the company. But there is stuff like, notes for this person's review who worked for me and things like that you have to be very sensitive about. Yeah.
Nathan Martz's review.
Sure. There's others too.
Yeah.
Interesting. But at some point I'll try to find a way to surface that out. It'll be a lot of scanning because they're pretty sizable and things like that. So maybe someday. But a lot of to-do lists, occasionally some math.
I'm sure people, anyway. If there's any, maybe you could find like a safe spot and like screenshot it and then just, you know what I mean? Or something, not the whole book, but like a little tidbit. Or
excerpts or something. Yeah.
I shouldn't have been this on the podcast, but I also, you may have one as well, but I have a copy of the original Republic Commando pitch doc. You remember those? The ones that we had bound? Yeah. I think Kevin has one too. I think it was called Clone Commando at the time, maybe. That was what's on the cover. Yeah. But it was
I definitely remember it.
Yeah, it was like 20 pages or something like that. It was kind of like a high-level brief. Yeah. It's one of the few artifacts I've kept, to be honest. The rest of them I don't keep. Never look back. So to the question, I mean, what? Yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the things that was more common those days. Yeah. Because you had this optical media that had tons of space on it, and you would put extra stuff in there. And it was also part of the sort of console culture to have unlockables. And some of that I think migrated to the PC as well. So on Starfighter, we had a number of different things. And then actually on the thing we had on Jedi Starfighter, which might have been a first, was we had video clips. We did 2 levels with a level designer and maybe you and Daron.
Oh, like director commentary.
Director commentary of those levels.
I totally forgot about that.
I don't think I've ever seen anything earlier than that. So if anybody knows of anything that's earlier than 2002.
Well, they did one for Half-Life 2, right? But
that's way later than that.
Way later? Huh.
Well, way later. It's a couple of years later. Yeah, it's the first one I know of.
I feel like we got that idea from someplace, though. But you might be right.
No, from DVD commentary.
Yeah, maybe it was because like the prequels, right? I think because of the prequel DVDs, right? And there was all that great content, director commentary content, extra content on the DVDs or something. And then we were like, well, we should do that same kind of thing for the game. Yeah, maybe so. I remember recording those. That's right. I totally forgot that. That was fun.
Yeah, one was Doug's level and one was Troy's level, maybe? One of Troy's and one of Doug's.
Yeah, or maybe Rich. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. It's one of those things that I think really should be done way more often. To be honest, I feel like what often happens is your shipping and all of those
down to the wire.
All those extra little tidbits usually get kind of left on the floor, on the cutting room floor kind of stuff, even though they obviously were also cut from the game. But those little extra things, I think for Halo 5, we actually associated them with achievements. So when you get an achievement, I think we maybe unlocked concept art that way. It's embarrassing that I'm forgetting how those were unlocked, but I think it's, and I agree with his point that because video games have become as big as they are, they can support, they can support materials and media that are associated with the games, like art books and stuff. And so that's become an extra source of sort of revenue and fun for the developers. So that's really what ends up happening, at least for Halo, because we have a pretty big consumer products department. So we have that benefit that not a lot of people have. But you make a deal with, Dark Horse or something, which a lot of games do. I think Naughty Dog has books that do that stuff too. So that might be why they reserve them these days, is so they can kind of get that extra hit on another item for players. But yeah, I think that's kind of a little bit of the era for sure.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a thing, and and unfortunately, the resolution wasn't really great. Obviously, you're talking 640, 480 for a PS2, so you actually really it's not super readable visually, and that stuff's kind of lost. I mean, at least with the books, you have a book, right? I mean, it's essentially plenty of dots per inch. I mean, with HD these days, I can imagine it's probably plenty good to see something really nice. But then you've also got, well, the textures get really, really huge if you want to be sort of print quality, and it's still, it's still not print quality. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's almost easier to preserve that stuff in book form. But when you do have these videos where you annotate them, where you discuss over them, there's really no other way to do that. Another place you used to see this was sort of in pre-release content. Would be interviews with developers. You still see this now and again, and sometimes concept art would kind of make its way into that. There'd be somebody talking, and then you'd be seeing images in the instead of the person talking, you'd see pictures of like what they had worked on and things like that. I can remember doing that for something at. I mean, I wasn't in any, but I know that that's been done. Certainly, I used to see that when video started being a thing on the internet as well. So there's lots of different ways to surface that stuff. But I agree, it'd be nice to see more of it. It's also an opportunity for people to talk about what they do for a living, and I always would encourage more of that, more knowledge out there about how games work and how they're built and when decisions happen. But yeah, it just, these sorts of things have to happen at the end of a project for obvious reasons, and that's when everybody's exhausted and trying to get the thing done. So it's a hard time to ask for that. So
yeah, justify.
Yeah, it can be very tough.
On the development side, the other kind of weird thing that people may not think about too is if it was unused or cut or something from the game, that it may not have been fully, essentially, quote unquote, cooked or depending on the form that you'd want to show it in. That's why a book may be easier. If it's not fully debugged and engine ready or something like that, then it's hard to justify getting it ready if it was something that was cut, just for this purpose, because the bang for buck obviously is hard sometimes to justify on the production side of things if you're going to show it in some sort of engine-y way. It wasn't exactly the same thing because they were not it wasn't that they were unused assets, but I remember the Arkham games did a good job at unlocking model assets and kind of like as rewards in a nice
super high res versions of Batman in different outfits
and with a viewer and
the enemies
zoom in and stuff. And so but that's that extra polish that really counts, that everyone wants to do. Every team wants to do that kind of stuff. It's just some of the realities, I guess.
Yeah, and sometimes you just don't want to show. I mean, you also have other issues too, like, well, you don't want to show this thing because, like you pointed out, it wasn't complete, wasn't fully baked. It's maybe only half of an idea or something like that. But then on the flip side, there's sometimes things are cut, but you're hoping you're going to use them in the future. So you don't want to show those either, because you might get a chance to use them in that sequel that you're hoping you'll get to do. And I can't remember anything along those lines that we ever had. Like I don't think there was any sort of Starfighter stuff that would have shown up in Jedi Starfighter, but that's the sort of thing that you can imagine. Well, maybe we'll take some of these ideas and use them later. So sometimes you want to hold that back as well, or it might hint at stuff that people will be upset to learn was cut, and so you just have to be really careful about that stuff. But I do definitely appreciate it when it's there. We don't normally talk about extras on the podcast, so that's why we didn't in this case either. But I do know that they're there. I remember even mentioning how, and it may have been off air, but I mentioned to Tim that there's a like, this was our first playable. There's a video of their first playable somewhere on the disc as well, and that's just kind of interesting. And it's from a very early part of the game. So, and it's not a character. It's a it's a man. It's a sort of box man or something like that. So it's animated, but it's not Kratos. So anyway, but yeah, thanks for the question. It's definitely it's one of those things around development. A lot of us would like to share more of our work. It's tricky to be asking us to do that at that time. So, all right. Well, sir, why don't you tell us what we're doing next?
Yeah, we're gonna go. We're gonna play the next 6 levels up through Nar Shaddaa. Very infamous level in my opinion. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff coming up for this section. A lot more about the Dark Trooper. We definitely want to get into that next time and talk about how they're ramping that up. But yeah, next 6 levels, and then the last session will be the last 5. So, every level is memorable in some way. So,
yeah, no, they really are, and I can't wait. Looking over the names of the levels that are coming up, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. But that's been a positive, like, oh yeah, that was cool. So I think it'll be fun for those who are playing along. If you'd like to watch me play them, I am trying to stream the games more frequently when we're playing them. And usually I aim to do the weekends I try to play the game, and then during the week I actually play some Fallout 3, which I worked on. So you can find me at twitch.tv/Brett Douville, no underscore, but you can find me on Twitter at Brett_Douville, and him at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
You can find the podcast at Dev Game Club. I try to watch that all day. And of course, you can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, where we have all the episodes and their show notes for the last couple of years. And I guess for that, I say thanks so much for listening, and good night.
Good night.